Video 2, we're going to talk about how to choose a random sample. We talked about different sampling techniques in video 1 and good sampling techniques and a simple random sample, stratified sample, cluster, systematic, multi-stage. I think those were our main 5 out of there. Now, we will need to devise what's we call a scheme for how we will accomplish a random sample, and it's split up into 3 parts. Number 1, we need to label our individuals in our population. Now, we'll talk about what that means for each type of simple random sample that we discussed in video 1, whether it's the physical HAP method, the technology method with our calculator, or with a random number table. So if we were using the HAP method, if you will, this step could just be writing everyone's name on equal sized pieces of paper. Done. We're not really having to label the individuals themselves, but we're labeling the pieces of paper that represent the individuals. If we were going to use our calculator or a random number table, now we need numbers for the people. So if we had 30 people, this would just be saying we need to label our people 1 through 30 if we wanted to use our calculator. If we were going to use a random number table, though, this is where it gets a little tricky. Because with the random number table, if we label people 1 through 30, for instance, then we have different numbers of digits, quantities of digits for our 30 people. People 1 through 9, they only use a single digit number. And then people 10 through 30, they all have 2 digits to represent their number, right? Like person 23 uses 2 digits, a 2 and a 3. So on a random number table, we need to be able to use the same number of digits for each person. So if I have guaranteed that I'm going to have to use double digits, then my people 1 through 9, they need to have double digits. So then what we'll do is we'll call our 1 through 9 01 through 09. And now they have 2 digits tied to them specifically. So once we've labeled our individuals or we've written their names on pieces of paper, now we need to discuss how are we going to select that first person. So with the HAP method, this is easy. We would just mix up the papers. We kind of blindly select a piece of paper. Boom, there's our first random individual. With our calculator, this would just mean you need to write out what kind of command you're using, that you're going to be using the randint function, and how you're using it. You would just say, I'm going to use my calculator to randomly select a number between 1 and 30. Now, your calculator knows the difference between the number 1 and the number 30. It knows that 1 is a single digit and 30 is a 2-digit, but it understands those are different numbers. So you don't have to say in your calculator 01 to 30. You can just do 1 through 30 and it's fine. Now, with a random number table, the extra thing you're going to have to do here is state how many numbers are you going to read at a time in the random number table. We mentioned if we used 30 students, we're going to have to be using double digits for each person. So you would say using the random number table, starting on whatever line you wanted to start with. So let's just say 120. Starting on line 120, I'm going to read 2-digit numbers at a time until I find my very first person. Now, there might be some conditions that we're going to have to throw in here. Like if we have just people 01 through 30, what if the first number is 62? Well, we don't have a person 62. So we're going to have to state in our scheme that we're going to read 2-digit numbers at a time on line 130, but we need to ignore numbers greater than 30 and ignore the number 00 because we don't have a person that's labeled 00. Our first person is 01. So state any numbers that need to be ignored. All right. And once you find a 2-digit number that's between 01 and 30, you've got your first person with the random number table. The last part you're going to have to do is just how are you going to repeat this process and for how long? And are there any other conditions we need to discuss? So with the HAP method, this step just means how many names will you select out of the hat? And will you put a name back into the hat before you select the next? Are repeat names okay? And in some cases, repeated names are acceptable, and sometimes it would just be ridiculous to repeat a person again. Like if you were picking names to be on a team, why would you pick the same person twice to be on a team? That really wouldn't make any sense. Now, with your calculator or the random number table, this simply just means you're going to continue getting random numbers from your calculator, or you're going to just continue reading on, say, line 120, reading two-digit numbers, still ignoring numbers that don't have people tied to those specific values, like numbers greater than 30 and 00. But we also need to discuss the repeated part. If repeated numbers are okay, then you can say repeats are okay. But again, if in most cases repeats aren't going to work out. So you would want to say, ignoring repeats, select however many numbers you need. So if I wanted a sample of size 5, if I've already picked my one person, I'm going to repeat this process 4 more times until I have selected my 4 other people to get my total of 5 for my sample. So we're going to look at one example here. It says here are the names of 10 guys on a local high school baseball team. At practice every 15 minutes, the coach randomly selects 2 guys to run sprints up a steep hill. Practice is 2 hours long and starts at 3 o'clock. Write a scheme using the random number table and use line 120 to determine who runs. So here's our 10 baseball players. And I've already kind of set this up here. I'm going to figure out who's going to run at 3:15 all the way to 5 o'clock. So my scheme would first have to go, I need to assign my players numbers because we're going to use the random number table. Now, I do have 10 individuals, but I do have 10 single-digit numbers. So ideally, I could label them 0 through 9. Now, how do I label them 0 through 9? Really up to you. I mean, do we want to go start at Joe at 0 and then say Ron is 1 and Dave is 2 and Matt is 3 and then go down to the next line until we end up at Gary is 10? Or do we want to start Joe is 0, Mark is 1, Ron is 2, Pat is 3, and keep going in an up and down from left to right motion? It really doesn't matter which way you go, but I'm going to do it like we would normally read, say, a book from left to right and top to bottom. So here would be my 10 values here. Now, if you really, really wanted to, you could say, I want to assign the players the digits 0, 1 through 10. And that's fine. But think about this. You're going to have to ignore a lot of numbers. You're going to have to ignore 11 through 99 and 00. There's only 10 numbers out of 100 you're going to accept. So if you can get by with fewer digit numbers, the ideal. Because if you think about it from 0 to 9, we've hit all the numbers, right? All single digit numbers are being accepted here. So there's not going to be any numbers we'll need to ignore at first. All right, so we've assigned our players values. Next up, we're going to select 2 single-digit numbers. We can't have repeats. We can't have the same person running at the same time with themselves, but repeats are okay at different times during practice. All right, so it doesn't say anywhere up here that once Joe runs, he can never run again during practice. Joe could run the first time, he could run the last time. So repeats in that case are okay. So our 2 single digits again represent the coach is going to randomly select 2 guys at a time. So here's how we're going to select our first sprint trial here at 3:15. And the last part is, how often are we going to do this? We're going to continue until 8 pairs of sprinters have been selected. So I've already got line 120 here, a little snippet for us. So if I were to start reading single digit numbers, and I need to read 2 single digit numbers at a time, this is telling me that people 3 and 5 are going to run first. So who is 3? Matt. Who is 5? Mark. Perfect. They are running first. So now who runs next? This is where the continuation part now is going to kick in. I need to get 8 more pairs. So the next 2 numbers will be people 4 and 7. So 4 and 7 are Brian and Jimmy. They run next. Who's up next? Person 6, person 5. Person 6 and 5 are Pat and Mark. Now this sucks for Mark because this is the second time he's had to run. The next 2 numbers are 5 and 9. Man, Mark has got to go back-to-back sprint runs here. Sucks to be Mark. He's running a lot here in this first hour. But again, it's all randomly selected, so he can't complain too much. Then we got people 7 and 2. We got Jimmy and Dave running. And then the next two would be people 3 and 9, Matt and Gary. Then there'd be people 4 and 2, Brian and Dave. And then last but not least, people 1 and 6, Ron and Pat. Now notice in this entire time, we didn't end up with any repeats within the same time period. And I don't think we would have ended up with one. Let's see, 2, 2, 2. No repeat, no repeat, no repeat. Ooh, we almost would get a repeat here with these two 6s. Yeah, at no point on line 120 do we run across the instance where we get a repeat within the same time frame and we'd have to ignore one of those numbers. So let me just say what would have happened if we had gotten Pat and Pat to run. Well, if that would have happened, we would have skipped and ignored the second Pat, and we would have jumped over it and picked Matt to run with Pat. So that's what would have happened in that case. So that is all for video 2. We will practice writing schemes quite a bit, and again, schemes are always in 3 parts. And all the schemes we will predominantly write will be using the random number table.